انشاءالله که سر سفره اهل بیت همیشه باشیم. بازم صلوات بلندی ختم کنیم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the early days of Islam, the religion was still small and it had even fewer followers. Joining Islam back then was not like joining Islam today. Back then, if you wanted to join Islam, you had to have a personal invitation from the Prophet ﷺ himself, and his mission had yet to go public. And yet, that wasn't enough to stop the idol-worshipping rulers of Mecca at the time from spreading lies and rumors about the Prophet, trying to ruin his image and destroy Islam. And so, the early Muslims in Mecca went through a lot of hardship, difficulty and persecution to simply be able to keep, retain and hold on to their faith. They were disowned by their tribes and families, intensely tortured, and in some cases even killed. Now, in life, there are different levels of wealth. One level of wealth is when you're so rich you can comfortably afford buying all the most expensive and popular brands. Gucci, Rolex, Supreme, Louis Vuitton, it doesn't matter. People within this wealth bracket can comfortably afford buying all of them. Another level of wealth, however, is when you're so wealthy and influential that you don't need any brands. You yourself are the brand. Whatever you wear, everyone else wants to wear. All your clothes are custom tailored, designed perfectly to fit you. Even your very shoes are custom tailored. And custom tailored shoes was one of the highest displays of wealth during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this level of wealth and influence is exactly what a young Meccan teenager by the name of Mus'ab ibn Umayr had. He was the Meccan trendsetter for all things fashion related. He wore a fragrance with such a scent that the people in the city used to try and replicate it and sell knockoff versions in the markets. He was also known for being extremely handsome and from a powerful idol-worshipping family. And so, Mus'ab's wealth, looks, and lineage combined had earned him a very respectable position within that Meccan society, despite only being a teenager. Now, given that rumors spread like wildfire, Mus'ab also heard these rumors that were going around about the Prophet ﷺ. But Mus'ab was a critical thinker. He didn't just blindly follow the masses. He thought to himself, isn't this Muhammad, who is now being called a madman and a liar, the very same person who built such a reputation for himself that he earned the title of As-Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful and trustworthy one? And so clearly something isn't adding up here. And Mus'ab, being in the very privileged position of being able to attend the secret gatherings of the Quraysh, was able to find out that the Prophet used to hold gatherings of his own with his very few select companions at a place called Darul Arqam. And so Mus'ab takes this information and he goes to Darul Arqam and he hears the Prophet deliver a sermon and recite ayahs of the noble Quran. And this had a deep and profound impact on Mus'ab, to the point that he himself embraced Islam. And he said, this is what my heart had been calling to all along. However, Mus'ab ibn Umayr knew that his conversion wouldn't come without a cost. He would be faced with trials and tribulations, starting with being forced to hide his religious beliefs from his community, from his family, and even his own parents, because if a word did get out, his very life could be at risk. Not long after, however, his mum did find out that he was attending the meetings of the Prophet at Dar al-Arqam, and she became furious and outraged, stripped him of all his possessions, house imprisoned him, had him tied up, and had a guard watching over him. That lifestyle of comfort and luxury that Mus'ab was so used to was now all gone. Sometime after, Mus'ab hears some news that some of the Muslims are escaping to Abyssinia to flee from the intense Meccan persecution. So Mus'ab waits patiently and calmly until the guard that is watching over him takes a break, and he quickly unties a rope that is holding him together, and he escapes and he joins the rest of the Muslims in Abyssinia. Not long after being in Abyssinia, however, the Muslims get news that it's actually now safe to return back to Mecca. And Mus'ab, as well as a very few amount of other people, decide to return to Mecca. But when they do return, they realize that this news is actually fake news. Not only had the situation not calmed down, but quite the opposite. It had escalated. The situation had worsened. The Meccan leaders had placed sanctions on the Muslims, prohibiting them from buying and selling from anyone, and forcing them to seek refuge in the canyon of Abu Talib alayhi salam, and they had to go through a period of starvation and hunger. Soon after, however, a very special opportunity arose. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a special mission he wanted one of his companions to go on. Now, imagine for a moment you and your companions want to visit a new city, say for example Tokyo, and one of your companions knows this city really well, and he is in touch with some of the most influential people within this city. So you tell this companion of yours, can you introduce me to the locals in such a way that when me and my companions do eventually go to Tokyo, we will be welcomed with open arms and the people's hearts will be naturally drawn towards us. That right there was exactly what the role of Mus'ab ibn Umayr was when the Prophet sent him to Yathrib, otherwise known as modern-day Medina. Mus'ab ibn Umayr was responsible for laying down the foundation and the very groundwork for the people's receptivity to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is a responsibility of astronomical importance, and yet the Prophet gave it to such a young youth, such a young man. Well, the question is, why is this important? Why was this role given to Mus'ab ibn Umayr? Mus'ab was not just any youth. Mus'ab was someone who had proven himself. His loyalty to the Prophet and to Islam was beyond doubt. He was sharp, awake and alert, and not confused, lost and ignorant. After all, he was one of the Prophet's best students at Dar al-Arqam. The young people in society often want to be treated like grown-ups as well. They want to feel dependable, they want to feel responsible, and they want to feel as if they're trusted by their broader community. The problem is, however, when you try and have a discussion with some of them, you find that they're usually stuck in the world of TikTok and Instagram and Netflix and a million and one other things other than what they should be really focused on. And it's our job as the elders to watch what they consume mentally just as much as we watch what they consume physically. But at the same time, it's unfortunate that the youth are usually dismissed simply because they're teenagers, because we think, they're immature simply because they're teenagers. When in reality, the very concept of a teenager is a social construct that wasn't popularized until as late as the 1940s. When we look at history, we see that they were treated and behaved and acted for the most part like adults. Allah and the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam want people who are loyal, trustworthy and reliable. People with characteristics like Mus'ab ibn Umayr. Now, when Mus'ab was in Medina, he started teaching them about the Quran, about the Prophet, and about the fundamental Islamic rulings. And slowly, the number of Muslims began to grow. But suddenly, one of the Meccan tribal leaders found out about this new young man who had entered their city. And he thought that this new religion that he was preaching, this young man was preaching, was only going to be a threat to him and his people. So he takes up a spear and he confronts Mus'ab ibn Umayr. And he says, either you leave the city or I'll make sure you leave. Mus'ab calmly responded to the man. He said, look, you're a wise man, you're a leader of your tribe, you're a leader of your people. Just hear me out, listen to what I have to say. If you like what I have to say, then accept it. And if you don't like what I have to say, then you're well within your means to reject it. And I won't stop, and I'll stop bothering you and your people. So the tribe leader thinks to himself, alright, let me hear what he has to say. I have nothing to lose. And after hearing the basic message of Islam, not only does he become Muslim, but he then converts his entire tribe to Islam. And this had an entire domino-like effect in Medina. Other tribe leaders in Medina started hearing about this Islam and coming to Mus'ab ibn Umayr one after the other. And they too converted, and they too went back to their people, and they converted as well. By this point in history, Mus'ab ibn Umayr may no longer have been the Meccan trendsetter in terms of fashion and clothing that he was once so well known for. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had replaced that with something far greater instead. He had now become the Medinan trendsetter for Islam. One of the most important points to consider in regards to Mus'ab ibn Umayr is that he was not infallible. He wasn't even the son of an imam. He did not even come from a Muslim family. Quite the opposite. He came from a family that actively opposed his right to practice his religion. And yet he still became this shining example that we know him of as today. Mus'ab ibn Umayr sacrificed everything he had for Islam. Having all the worldly possessions taken from him, having nothing but a cloth to cover himself, he went to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet pointed towards him and said, look at this young man who forsook all the luxuries and pleasures of this world for the sake of Allah and His Messenger. But there's one man in history whose sacrifice for Islam will be remembered forever. And that is Abul Fazl Abbas. Abbas had a very special place in the heart of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Those with a brother know that a brother is like a supporter, someone you can depend on, someone you can rely on, someone you can trust. And maybe that is why when Abul Fazl Abbas was martyred on the day of Ashura in the plains of Karbala, his face began to change colour, and he said something he didn't say for anybody else. Alan in kasarat zahri. Now my back is broken. In other words, up until now, I may have only had a one-man army, but as long as Abbas was that one-man army, I had all the support I needed. The women and the children still felt safe and secure. Uncle Abbas was still there to protect them. One last thing I want to say. Whenever we fall over or trip up, it's our natural reaction to put out our hands to protect ourselves. My question is, when Abbas fell from his horse, what did he have to protect himself? وَسَيَعْلَمَ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ما شاء الله ما شاء الله. احسن احسن.
خداوند انشاءالله تمامی